The Founders, The Divine Dispensations. By Sal Rachele. July 25, 2016. Website: salrachele.com. Produced by Higher Self.
There have been several major dispensations issued forth from the Godhead that are relevant to your progress as an individual soul. They are, in chronological order, as follows. The answer to the separation, or fall from grace. The galactic shifts, occurring approximately every 108 million years. The precessional alignment of the Earth, occurring approximately every 25,920 years. The Will of Reincarnation. The Spiral of Ascension. The Mass Ascension. The interventions of God's helpers during major civilizations. The introduction of the highly evolved children. The First Divine Dispensation, the answer to the fall. As stated above, the simple definition of the fall is the tendency of a soul to identify with the realm in which the soul is exploring. The answer to the fall and its resulting belief in separation from God, manifested as an implanted and imprinted program within the DNA of fallen souls. Without this intervention mechanism, the decision of souls to evolve would be left entirely up to free will. Within a few million years subsequent to the emergence of souls from the Godhead, many souls had become so enmeshed in the lower densities that they might never have remembered their divine origin and made the choices necessary to extricate themselves from the bondage of identification with material form. Therefore, at the same time as the fall, there was already an answer. In eternity, all time happens now, and so there is ultimately no lapse in time between the problem and the answer. That answer is a complex series of implants and imprints within the etheric field of each soul, in the form of a series of DNA codes and keys that trigger awakening at various intervals. These triggers affect the functioning of free will significantly. While it is still possible for a soul to refuse to listen to the voice of God within, the soul essence, in favor of the voice of the ego, the part identified with material form, it becomes increasingly difficult to ignore the signals being sent from God through the activation of the ascension codes and keys. The master template of ascension is one of the implanted DNA keys. This template is activated during the Fifth Divine Dispensation, the Spiral of Ascension, which will be detailed below. Essentially, the First Dispensation established a permanent link between the separated souls and their higher selves, the aspects of the soul residing in densities 5 through 12. While ultimately, this link is eternal and can never be broken, the time period, in Earth years, required for every soul to re-establish this link on its own would have been far too long to keep the creation going in any semblance of order. As you know, souls tend to get lost in the intricacies of free will, and had everything been relegated strictly to free will, it would have likely taken a very long time for even the most basic of learning to proceed. So the Godhead decided to provide a special pathway back to the remembrance of a soul's oneness with Source. This first dispensation manifests in some souls as the conscience, or as a vague and subtle reminder that there is a better way of living than identification with the ego. It is what spurs you on and keeps your hopes up when things appear hopeless. We will now discuss the second dispensation, which takes the form of a periodic cosmic event, or cycle. The second dispensation is the Galactic Shift, discussed in depth in the following sections. The Galactic Shift is an emanation from the central sun of each galaxy that bathes the rotating and revolving stars and solar systems with a high-frequency burst of radiation at periodic intervals during each revolution of the galaxy. In the Milky Way galaxy, this shift occurs approximately every 108 million years for stars and solar systems in the arm of the galaxy in which the Earth is located. Each time the Earth and her neighboring stars and planets pass through this beam of light, the dominant vibration of the atomic structures on such stars and planets is moved up to the next density level, through a process known by various names, including the entering of the photon belt, stargate, or portal. Since there are no illustrations available at this point to describe the galactic shift, you can picture it as a spiral shaped like a spring or coil. As you move along the coil, you return over and over to the same point on the spiral, except that you are shifted into a higher position along the coil. When you look at your galaxy from a vertical point above the plane of the spiral, it appears there is only one dimension to the spinning arms of the spiral, but in actuality, the galaxy is much like the coil in that each time it spins, the vibration changes and you emerge at a higher point. So essentially, every 108 million years, halfway through one revolution around the central sun, a shift is made into a higher frequency of light. We will explain the time discrepancy between the galactic shift and the duration of one revolution of the galaxy, in the specific section on the galactic shift coming later in this treatise. The galactic shift is a dispensation designed to create an upper time limit on how long souls can linger in a particular realm without showing definitive signs of growth and soul evolution. Since God knew that not all souls would be ready to undergo this shift during its naturally occurring time cycle, the decision was made to transfer the laggard souls to planets in other regions of the galaxy to allow them more time to prepare for the shift. The mechanics of the shift will be described in detail in the following sections. There are teachings on your planet that suggest that the reason for all the problems on Earth has to do with the laggard souls incarnating upon this world that were cast out from other worlds. To some extent this is true, since some of the souls incarnating on Earth originally came from worlds that were getting ready to ascend. Such souls were not ready to make the shift and were transferred to Earth as their planet of remedial learning. Now they are being given another chance to graduate, and some of them will make it this time. Others will be sent to yet another remedial planet for a third try. In some rare cases, souls have failed to progress even after going through many transfers to more slowly evolving planets. It is not possible to postpone the galactic shift inevitably. Eventually all souls must go through the process. Souls that are unable to withstand the shift, and that have exhausted their transfer options, go through what has been referred to as the second death. The second death is merely a reassembling, or recycling of the soul matrix back into the Godhead. In a sense, it is like starting over from the beginning with a new soul matrix. Such souls will be merged back into the Godhead and then will re-emerge back into creation at a later time. This is the only case in which souls actually merge back into the Godhead, and it is, as we stated before, extremely rare. The third dispensation, the precessional alignment of the Earth. The Godhead gave each planet involved in the fall a chance to make periodic jumps, or mutations, within its species, humanoid and otherwise, by creating a way for a planet to align itself with periodic bursts of energy from at or near the center of the galaxy, smaller than the ones issued forth during the galactic shift, but powerful nonetheless. In the case of Earth, this alignment occurs once during each precession of the axis. The mechanics of the alignment of the axis with these energy bursts are discussed in the following sections. Approximately every 25,920 years, the Earth goes through an energy shift that accelerates the evolution of the organisms present on her surface. As with the galactic shift, not all organisms will be able to make the shift successfully. Many perish, leave their physical forms, and have the opportunity to reincarnate at a later time on Earth, or on another planet. This brings us to the fourth dispensation. The fourth dispensation, the Will of Reincarnation. When souls first started exploring the outer worlds, the bodies they entered into had been designed, by us and other creator gods, to endure for as long as they were needed. Once the soul had seen everything he or she wanted to see and experience within a given realm, that soul would discard the body and return to a state of pure spirit in preparation for the next journey. Theoretically, the bodies taken on by such souls could last indefinitely, and in the beginning most of them lasted for thousands of Earth years. As time went along and the souls became more and more identified with the lower worlds they were exploring, their bodies began to decay and disintegrate at a faster and faster rate. Souls would enter into a lower world and in only a few hundred years their bodies would die. These souls left many lessons unlearned and many projects incomplete. Because they had fallen so far in vibration, it was nearly impossible for them to return to their home state, seventh density, without leaving pieces of themselves scattered throughout the lower dimensions. This is the process known as soul fragmentation, which is discussed in the first ebook. To allow souls to complete their assignments and reassemble their fragments, the Will of Reincarnation was invented. Now souls did not have to return to their seventh density homes before incarnating again. In actuality, they had lost the ability to do so anyway, and so until this dispensation, many of them wandered, lost, and confused, in the many astral and etheric planes surrounding the worlds in which they had incarnated. Now, with the process of reincarnation available, these souls and soul fragments could re-enter the world in which they had just left and continue their lessons there in another body. The souls were allowed to reincarnate as many times as they needed until they had learned all that they desired to learn in that particular world, and until all of their pieces and fragments had been reassembled into an integrated whole. Once this integration occurred, such souls were free to return to their home state, seventh density, and then explore other worlds and other density levels. The fifth divine dispensation, the Spiral of Ascension. The process of reincarnation had many benefits, but it was highly inefficient because each time a soul reincarnated, most of the memory of its past lives was lost or obscured by the veil surrounding the lower density planets. Therefore, a great deal of time and attention was spent relearning and remembering the lessons from previous lifetimes. In addition, the birth and death processes themselves created a lot of trauma and fragmentation within the souls. It was like taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back each time a soul incarnated. A process was devised whereby a soul could evolve directly into the next density level without discarding the physical form. This made it possible for the soul to enter the next series of lessons without having to relearn and remember, and without having to go through the traumas of birth and death. This process is known as the Spiral of Ascension. Unfortunately, until very recently, very few souls were able to go through this process because it required that a certain amount of karma be balanced, and a certain critical number of soul fragments be reassembled before the soul had enough energy consolidated to be able to make the shift. Once a soul had enough awareness to be able to go through the ascension process, the preset triggers, including the master template, would be activated, causing an automated conversion to take place, converting the physical body to an etheric body. A similar process takes place as a soul evolves from the etheric body into a celestial body. The sixth divine dispensation, the Mass Ascension. When the Ascension spiral was introduced, the requirements were very strict. A soul had to have nearly all of its karma balanced, all fragments reassembled, and be able to pierce the veils of forgetfulness, amnesia, inherent in the lower worlds. This was an arduous task, and until the Sixth Dispensation was issued in 1950, only about 300 Earth souls had managed to move off the Will of Reincarnation and onto the Spiral of Ascension. These 300 souls were the product of nearly 10 million years of inhabitation of Earth by humans. Many of these souls reached great heights of awareness, only to have their bodies be destroyed when the major civilizations ended, due to calamities caused by the ending of the precessional cycles, or by warfare, or from intervention by negatively polarized ETs, or by other celestial events. The Sixth Dispensation was essentially a ruling by the Godhead decreeing that souls did not have to complete all their karma or assemble all their minor pieces before being allowed to ascend to the next level of vibration. The Mass Ascension resulting from this dispensation is scheduled to occur in stages, beginning around 2012 and ending around 2030. These are only the major ascension periods being catalyzed by the shifts. Souls will continue to ascend between these major waves of ascension, but not in as great a number as during the years 2012, 2017, and 2030, years that correspond to major celestial events. These celestial events alter the electromagnetic field around the Earth, which in turn precipitates mutations in the DNA of humans and certain other life forms. A detailed description of how this works will be found later in this book. When souls ascend physically, they enter into a fifth density state of consciousness. However, the Earth will be primarily in a fourth density state, and the majority of souls that survive the Earth changes will be in fourth density. By the year 2030, approximately 15 to 30 million souls will be likely to have gone through physical ascension on Earth. As planet Earth moves into the more intense frequency bands of the Galactic Shift, between 2015 and 2035 as discussed later, she and all her life forms will move into the fourth density, with the exception of those going through the ascension spiral, they will be in fifth density. Souls unable to make the shift from third to fourth density will leave Earth and reincarnate on other planets more suited to their level of soul growth. This is the transfer spoken of during our discussion of the Second Dispensation. The Seventh Dispensation, intervention by God's helpers. To assist souls in preparing for ascension, and to help those souls not ready for ascension that wish to remain with Earth during her translation from third to fourth density, a dispensation was granted allowing beings from higher densities permission to intervene in the affairs of humanity. This dispensation has two parts. 1. Instruction and help in the process of growth and evolution, and 2. Intervention in the nuclear, neutron, electromagnetic and chemical weapons programs on Earth. In the 1940s, when human beings began testing the atomic bomb, it was evident that they had the capabilities of not only destroying physical life on Earth, but also severely retarding the ability of souls to ascend. These weapons disrupt the astral and etheric fields around the Earth as well as the physical, and they also affect neighboring planets. Therefore, ET civilizations with highly advanced technology were allowed to come to Earth to prevent humans from blowing themselves up with nuclear weapons. Since the 1940s, other classes of weapons have also been added to the list approved for intervention. The decision regarding which weapons to neutralize was based on the principle of critical mass, not unlike the critical mass of nuclear material. At the time the Godhead made this decision, the number of souls that had evolved on Earth was now sufficient to warrant such a drastic measure. It was determined that the peaceful, loving souls on Earth that wanted to move into fourth density along with the Earth, as well as the ones going through ascension, would need to have safe havens in different places around the planet where they could be free from radioactive fallout and the electromagnetic disruptions of warfare. Only those weapons systems capable of making the entire planet unsafe were banned. Warring humans were free to bomb themselves into oblivion with conventional weapons, while the more enlightened members of the human race would be guided to safe havens. This is the process taking place today on planet Earth. Your nuclear weapons have been neutralized on 5 different occasions since 1962. The Bay of Pigs incident near Cuba was the first such intervention. There were later interventions made in the United States and the Soviet Union. The most recent intervention was made in the fall of 2007 when a renegade group attempted to start a war between Iran and Iraq, or rather, between Iran and the occupying forces in Iraq. This group attempted to launch a nuclear missile from within Iran. The missile never made it out of its silo, as the launch codes were immediately neutralized by one of the benevolent factions assisting Earth. There have also been attempts by the so-called Illuminati and their black operatives to formulate and propagate chemical, neutron, and electromagnetic weapons upon unsuspecting enemies. These weapons are a little more difficult to detect, but God's helpers, with the use of sophisticated clairvoyance and electromagnetic field surveillance, have been able to prevent any large-scale use of these weapons. There are numerous ET groups conglomerated around the EM grid system of the Earth, working to prevent EM weapons and other negativity from producing anomalies in the etheric field of Earth. The ley lines and vortexes that make up the EM grid of Earth are essentially portals that allow the physical and etheric worlds to interface. Advanced civilizations use these grid lines as their entry and exit points into your world. These grid systems are what keep your Earth and its etheric counterpart in balance. If the grids are disrupted beyond a certain point, it can literally tear the fabric of time and space and make life on Earth not only impossible, but also disrupt life in the entire solar system. Most of the other planets in your solar system have life in the etheric and celestial planes. The grid system of Earth can become imbalanced not just from nuclear and EM weapons, but also from large amounts of negativity, fear and other thought forms magnified due to large numbers of souls participating in those thoughts. That is why you often have negative vortexes in areas where a lot of souls are stuck in negativity. Negativity, as defined here, means anything within consciousness that tends to obstruct or prevent a soul from growing and evolving in a natural way. The emergence of negative vortexes due to concentrated negative thinking was another reason groups of enlightened souls were sent to intervene in the affairs of Earth. The phenomenon known as crop circles that you see in your wheat fields is a byproduct of the grid work being done by various ET groups. As they balance and stabilize the grid system around your planet, they often leave sacred symbols and triggers behind in order to help you awaken. These impressions left in the fields are formed by creating many vortexes using ET machinery on board the spacecraft. This is the same equipment used to transport their ships. The specific group responsible for the majority of the genuine crop circles are the 4th density Pleiadians, supervised by 7th density Arcturians. The 8th Dispensation, the arrival of the enlightened children. Beginning in the 1950s, the Godhead realized that in order to preserve free will among the enlightened souls of Earth, it would be necessary to bring about change from within. The best way to do this was to introduce highly evolved souls through the incarnational process, as it was usually too risky to land spaceships on the Earth and have their occupants walking openly among incarnated humans, although there are a few groups doing this. To use a metaphor, God raised his hand and said, "Who wants to volunteer to come to Earth and assist during this critical time? I want only the best and the brightest souls." We will, shouted an exuberant crowd. And now here they are, coming in droves to your world, from all over the universe. Some have been in 7th density worlds prior to coming into Earth, and as such have retained most or all of their psychic and intuitive abilities. They are peace-loving souls who will not tolerate violence and hatred. They are aware of the risks of coming to Earth and are willing to take the chance that they might get caught in the veils of illusion. There have been 3 waves of these souls, the first during the baby boom of the 1950s and 1960s, the second during the 1980s and 1990s, and the third during the present time on Earth. They have been given various names, including Indigo, the first wave, Crystal, the second wave, and Rainbow, the third wave. Each group coming in is generally more highly evolved than the previous group. This is to ensure that as the vibration of Earth rises rapidly, the souls coming in later will have a greater chance of being able to withstand the vibrations of Earth without losing awareness. Many of the Indigo children are now adults giving birth to Crystal and Rainbow children. These parents have enough awareness to encourage the children to develop their intuitive and psychic abilities. Some of these children have perfectly developed telepathic abilities and are able to trigger spontaneous healing. A few have developed the abilities of psychokinetics, moving objects mentally that are close by, and telekinetics, moving objects mentally from a distance. Eventually some will learn the advanced techniques of levitation, teleportation, and bilocation. Contrary to information being circulated by some groups on Earth, very few souls have the ability to shapeshift into other life forms. This is an ability reserved mostly for souls who have evolved into ninth density and beyond, and very few souls from those levels of awareness are manifesting bodies on Earth anyway, as it is risky even at their level. What is being mistaken for shapeshifting is actually partial and full possession of humans by astral ET entities that have non-humanoid forms. There will be a later section dealing with possession of humans by Dracos, Orions, Sirians, and certain Zetas. Now that we have laid the groundwork for the discussion to follow, we will commence to describe the mechanics of the Galactic Shift, occurring between 1950 and 2100, and the precessional alignment, scheduled to occur in the year 2012. We are the founders, in the consciousness of God's limitless love and compassion, ever at your service.